We're delighted to welcome Swarup Dutta to lead today's presentation.
Thank you.
A big round of applause for him before I continue to introduce him further. Swarup is a multidisciplinary artist, designer, educator, and scenographer based in Kolkata, working internationally across art, design, craft, and fashion. And he holds a master's degree in fashion and textiles from Nottingham Trent University and has been closely associated with institutions such as NIFT Kolkata and the Indian Institute of Craft and Design, Jaipur. Over more than 2 decades, his practice has been deeply rooted in long-term collaboration with artisans across Bengal, engaging with craft revival, heritage conservation, and community-based work. Spanning scenography, design, photography, spatial storytelling, and education, his work foregrounds equity, co-authorship, and the transformative potential of craft knowledge in contemporary contexts. His recent exhibition, Core, has received wide critical appreciation, further underscoring the depth and sensitivity of his practice. We are grateful to have Swarup with us this evening to take forward and give us insights and lead us to conversations with his work that we will be surely inspired by. Please join me in welcoming Swarup once again. Over to you, Swarup.
Thank you, Dr. Hi, everyone. Can I stand or?
Yes.
Can, huh? Yeah.
And we have to match. Most welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi. I'm so glad you guys could make it. Welcome. When we were deciding on the topic of conversation, we were thinking, what do we call it? Do we call it crafting in Bengal or crafting Bengal? And that was a bit of a discussion that we had, and we figured maybe we can call it crafting Bengal because these conversations, the dialogues, emerge as sort of constructive notes, which then take the dialogue forward, and bit by bit, with very small conversations, some interesting sort of results emerge. It's a very personal journey, and I put some pointers as to, I was just thinking yesterday, where does my interest in collaboration, creating together, how and where has it taken root, and there was some, I've grown up in the Northeast, and I've always seen around me makers. You see that doing things with your own hand is something that's slowly going away from our lives. Everything comes pre-packaged. We don't know what's happening behind. And the joy of creating with your own hands is going away. And I feel that with that, empathy is also going away. Because when you create with your own hands, you also value the effort that others have put in. And I feel that that sensitivity and empathy is going away. And I've actually grown up in an environment where I've already seen people making something, building houses, making mats, making basketry, forging. So it's quite interesting that that's something that I've always seen around me growing up. Also, me and my dad were a great team, He would always encourage, he was never like, it's your assignment, you do it. He would always chip in. He was an engineer, and it was interesting that in class assignments, we would always get good marks. I would get good marks because he would always chip in. So in some sense, you would think it's unethical, but the team spirit that we developed of working together and kind of we shared our domains where maybe he'll outline something and I'll then fill it up, and that collaborative work is something that I think has stayed with me for a long time. So I don't think I've always craved for authorship. Sometimes yes, but otherwise I've been interested in working together, So it was it's quite interesting. Yesterday night I was thinking, where does it's been close to 50, so it's been a while that must have roots somewhere, and I was trying to trace the roots of perhaps which experiences would have shaped it. And also when we would come to Calcutta from the hills, he would always take me to the museum. Every time I've come, he would take me to one museum or the other, or we've repeatedly seen them, taken me to movies. So that exposure is quite interesting. It also helps you make opinions, and have a voice which develops over a period of time. And I think that's kind of important. I remember when we just got admission at NIFT, and it was in a building called Manjusha Bhavan, and we'll walk into the building, and there were these huge sort of grotesque masks, and at that point I didn't know where they came from. But I remember an interesting conversation we had. One of our teachers who came from, she basically came from London. She was this Catholic lady, and she'll always complain about the mask. Because she'll be like, we're entering a happy space, and you have these grotesque masks which welcomes me every day, and I don't like it. And it was quite interesting. I had no answer to it. Why? What's the nuances? Why is it there? What does it signify? So it just actually made me more curious about where they come from. So I think that question lingered, and I think it's quite interesting how those dots got connected, later on. Also, my travel across India while I was at NIFT was, quite interesting when we actually met so many makers at different parts of India. And also when I traveled abroad for the first time, and I'm talking about a time when there was not much content, information available in this country. In fact, I have a funny story about that. One of our teachers came, and she was asking if you've ever seen any fashion magazine, and all that we had seen that time in Calcutta was Femina and Glad Rags. And she was aghast. She said, "You've not seen a Vogue? You've not seen a Vogue? You guys should go and check out, I'm sure it'll be available, some second-hand ones." And so we went looking for Vogue, and so unassumingly, from Preschool Street, I started looking, and, we couldn't find any. This is 95. And so I ended up being around Regal Cinema, and that it's just beside the corporation. And it's quite interesting. That space was, it was dark. It was winters, and I went and asked. And I said, "Aapke paas Vogue hoga?" And he said, "Yeah, ruko, main la ke deta hu." So I'd taken some money from Dad, and I remember giving it to him, and he took the money, and he got me this bunch, after 15 minutes, bunch of salacious magazines. And I'm like, ये नहीं चाहिए, Vogue बोला था. So he said, हाँ, Vogue. So it's interesting, it just seems like another world completely. You wouldn't have an experience like that now, but so we've grown up in a situation where the exposure to the larger world, or to even make your opinion, was difficult. So when I travel, you see a lot of things which you take it for granted. They don't, आपकी दृष्टि नहीं बढ़ती है जब तक आप उसको दूसरे context में नहीं देखते हैं. So my travel abroad actually showed me the reverence of creating with your hand, and what resources we have, and how we are not really looking at it. So it was quite interesting. It just, when you go out of the context, that you realize so many things that you don't otherwise. And one of my pivotal moments was, as a very young mind, I remember going to Santa Fe. And that was quite an interesting experience, because I actually saw for the first time you had artists and artisans, and there wasn't really like a divide. They were working in the same studio, co-creating together. And I think for a young mind, that was quite, it left an impact on me. And I always dreamt of doing things together, and exchanging. And I saw what it could bring. So Santa Fe, I think, was one of the strongest impressions as a young mind that I had. And I think All of this over a period of time shaped my practice. I'll not go into this, it's all right. You know, we all know how craft is treated in this country, and that hegemony has always bothered me. So I was always looking at a practice where, you know, if I could work together and share and credit each other and have conversations. So in my early days when we started doing some projects, you know, I of course had a so-called voice or a language which I felt was mine, and it, you know, I love graphics, so, you know, for various training programs we started developing so-called craft products. And it's graphical. These were actually done in Barmaid long back. But I love typography, you know, my work was very graphical. So these are my early sort of bodies of work. It's also interesting how, you know, a lot of time when you do applique and you're working with women who just started doing it and they don't get the lines together. So, you know, I took typefaces which were also irregular in that sense, had an emotive aspect, and then worked around it. So these were some of my initial experiments. And I thought they were cool at that point of time. And of course, the same voice also transcended materials. You know, these were what some of my first projects in Shantiniketan, where we worked with Shantiniketan leather. Actually, the issue was that the artisans would actually get the worst grade of leather, you know. And the initial experimentation on leather, you know, batik as well as painting, it was free-flowing, but over a period of time, they became blocks. And then precision became a thing. So what happened was that you get the worst material, and then you had to recreate very precise designs on top of that. And so that was a problem we were trying to solve, to see if the designs became a little more free-flowing, then maybe we could hide the anomaly of the material, you know, and there was no way out of it. And so we basically did interesting small things like this. It's a leather batik. Again, typographical work. But it was in one of these workshops that I actually met, you know, I was working with a set of potuas, Potachitra artists, and leather artisans. And I figured that if I could just take myself out of the equation and let them have a conversation with each other, that could be interesting. So what we did was that we got the Potachitra artists to talk to the leather artisans and see if they could paint on leather. So it was just about adapting the medium. And I thought that it would be interesting if I could take myself out of the equation and see what happens if they start having a conversation together. So as you know, in Potachitra there are various kinds of sort of stories that are narrated. A lot of it is religious, and a lot of it is content which is folk and secular. And so, you know, Machir Biye is one big sort of episode that they keep narrating. And I love the fish motifs. Also with Bengal, you know, there's always an association of fishes. And so there was a sort of an adoption of material, and we tried to see if they could paint on the leather dyes. And this is way back in 2003, 4. You know, so my initial ideas of seeing what would germinate, you know, if we put them together. And this is what they came up with, which was quite interesting, I thought, you know, for the times. I mean, you have to see it in the context of time also, because this work done in 2004. And some really fun things came out of this conversation. You know, I mean, these boxes, tri-flower stands, and these were all narratives of, okay, if there is a water body, you'll have bigger fishes at the bottom. So this conversation with the artisans actually culminated in the visuals that they created. It's about folk-life, but celebrating harvesting, harvest festivals, making tari. They made little boxes. But this entire process, we had retracted completely. We were just letting them identify a certain form, and then they were just doing whatever they wanted to create. It's quite interesting that now when you go to handicrafts fair, you don't, even if the fish is drawn, I just see a homogeneity in the way the fish is drawn, which is kind of crazy. I don't know if any one of you gone to the handicraft fair this time. There are 200 people drawing literally the same thing in terms of content. Even if the content is same, the stylization's also the same. It's bizarre. So I don't know how that happens, but if you would draw a fish and I'll draw a fish, they'll be different, right? But it isn't. It just looks schooled in a certain way. So anyway, so the fact was that the compositions were done by them, So it is an extended pond in which the fish is. And then we also try to see how we can craft, more value-added products with them. And we also tried then adopting it to various other materials. It's turned out quite interesting, I thought, for the times. So this actually was quite an interesting piece, because with Patachitra artists, they would always have a story. So what happens is when you see the scroll, you're only taking one half home. The other half is left with the artisan because nobody knows the songs. So I was just talking to one of them and I said, "Tomra to thakbe na, to maach ki bolche." What the fishes are saying to each other, nobody knows. So he said, "Acha dada, dekh chi kora jaye." And this is what he did actually. He basically made these speech bubbles and wrote the script of what they sing. And I thought that was brilliant. And in that twist, that one conversation twisted it and made it into such a pop piece in that sense that it just literally changed context. And so this actually, experimentation stayed with me for a while. And I was so thrilled by just the questioning, changing the context, that I felt this should happen more. So I'll just take you through my conversations with Patachitra artists. This one is with Uttam, who came to me. I was working on a project called Chal Phrase. It was a restaurant which had opened, and ground floor of the restaurant, that designed the restaurant. But the ground floor of the restaurant was a place where we were supposed to have street food. And I got into this whole conversation of what is street food. What is street culture, so that it reflects the same. And what we came up with was that what your driver is listening to when you're not in the car may be the real sort of street culture. And a lot of our drivers, especially from Bihar, were listening to interesting content at that time. And if you trace back the history, you would see that when you had factories in Bengal, all of these men, especially a lot of them from Bihar, would come and stay here. But they would stay without the family. So when they had, they would just come out and they'd live in these sort of, barracks for men. Apart from work, what do they do? So a lot of time they would engage in conversations or songs which had sexual innuendos in them. And it's quite interesting that the same community, when they went back, that became actually the mainstream Bhojpuri music culture. And so the initial conversations of the genesis of it was here, living in these barracks where men would just stay with each other, without their families. And so that connection was quite exciting. And so we explored that, and what we did was we took Potachitro artists and we gave them these interesting songs, Bhojpuri songs. So we listened to about 100, 150 Bhojpuri songs and we pulled out. And I don't know if you guys have ever listened to these songs, they're quite fun. Yeah. So the idea was, because it was a hospitality space, we also had to keep it very naive looking. And so we actually took stencil fonts and we superimposed the stencil fonts with the imagery. And I thought we got some interesting visuals. Have you ever heard of these songs, Darshan? No? You've not heard of Lollipop Lagilu?
Yeah. Some songs are not familiar with them.
Ah.
Very honestly, yeah. But like I said, I've been to the space many times rather.
Right.
So I knew that you were.
So the idea was, the layering. Also, why Potachitra or Kalighat pot style was because when the Potuas came to Calcutta and they settled around the Kalighat area, and initially they were all making religious imagery, So you would come out after the darshan and you'll buy maybe a image of the god, you'll take it home for worship. But all the Potuas, interestingly, started going to different jatras. And at that time, the jatra culture was really big in the city. And what were the jatras about? They were all about all the scandals in the city. And so, from a religious, content, slowly they shifted to these interesting scandals. So it's quite interesting that you would see in Kalighat pot, have you seen the curtains on the side? And I've always wondered why. It's actually a reference to them watching the jatra, the theatre curtains being drawn out, So, so these were very difficult ones because the conversation with Uttam, who actually has drawn these images, were how to keep it naive. Yeah. Because the text already is, and I love the way he stylized the hat. So I wouldn't have thought of it. It is fantastic. And I love the way his take on the rendering. And so it's actually have become a long-lasting relationship that I've worked on various projects with him. I just show you how they were used in the space. You see, basically they were just scattered all over on the walls. Yeah. So that was the space. So this was a very interesting conversation. This was during pandemic. Uttam called and said, there is hardly any work. Will you buy some pots? So I said, listen, I have enough of your work already. And you guys are just making the same Babu Bibi. I'm just bored. How many Babu Bibis can I buy? So, within that conversation, I actually said, maybe you should make Bibi Bibi and Babu Babu. And that actually stayed with him. And taking that conversation forward, we actually developed this entire series on gender fluidity, questioning gender, same gender relationships. And I thought that was fantastic how he also took the conversation that we were having and took it forward. And then, we sat a couple of times and he also narrated his experiences of it, and this entire series came from there. And it's interesting how he's actually looked at cross-dressing, with the beard and the topor. And the notion of fashion is entirely his. I thought it was such a fantastic take on contemporary life. This one is actually one of my favorite of this gaze, looking in and what are you feeling, and this whole mirror is something that's used quite often in Kalighat pot, but what you see in the reflection, I thought was fantastic. So last year I did an exhibition called Gandhi Baat, and I thought design needed to address, communication design does address issues of of design activism, but other fields, don't. And I felt as designers, perhaps that's a conversation we need to have more. We do tend to stay safe, and so I thought it'd be interesting if we talk about politics, and being apolitical is also a political statement. But it's interesting how if you are in the city, our overlap with the government is so little. Like apart from electricity, water, and roads maybe, there's not much overlap. But like our kids don't go to government schools. So what happens is medical care, we're always retracted. We're going to private hospitals. So the overlap is very, very minimal. And so anything to do with politics, we always say, "Acha politics hai," So that's why Gandhi Baat, basically, that you don't want to talk about dirty politics. But the fact is that conversation is important. And so we made some objects which are like Trojan horses. We unassumingly wanted to pass it on. And you take it home, and then hopefully you would indulge in some conversations. So critical design is a field, which doesn't only look at form, function, the usual problem-solving nature of design, but it is kind of in its practice close to art, where you're basically critically thinking about things. And so, and there are a couple of points there that, critical design is provocative, it's speculative, it reflects on society. And so, I wanted to take you through this journey, and it was quite an interesting, fascinating journey. The exhibition happened in Delhi at 47A. This is Kotachiwadi, which is an interesting area. It's a heritage precinct. It's sort of in the middle of Bombay, and a lot of Anglo-Indian families actually used to stay, but they're being squeezed out because it's just a little pocket, and all outside is these huge multi-storied buildings, and there's a resistance from the community to hold on. And I thought it was a great space from that context to have the exhibition there also. So I work with Tulu. He's a farmer, but Gomiramas are from Dinajpur, both the district, north and south, and basically they make masks which then are worn and then are performed. Yeah. But it only happened once a year, and so traditionally they would just make the mask around that time, and that's about it, And so through various interventions, there's now making masks which then are coming in as decorative items in urban homes. But a lot of us don't know the context of what the masks are meant for. But mostly they're farmers. Anyway, I'll take you through that journey. So this is the kind of mask that they make. It has an interesting little narrative about what it stands for. You can make out if it's a performative mask or not by one simple indication that if the eyes are cut, then it's performative. If it's not, then it's just meant to go on the wall. And so this was an interesting conversation. I was with Tulu, and around that time, this whole conversation around MSP was happening. You guys know about MSP? Minimum support price? No? So when you sell a produce, and if the produce is perishable, of course it has to be sold, right? But sometimes there is overproduction. So and this is a huge issue in India, and there were huge protests in India, if you remember, where farmers were protesting. One was that if the government doesn't support, then the farmers can't sustain, and because they don't have facilities of storage, and where would they sell? So there is a situation where they can be squeezed out in terms of the prices. Sometimes with overproduction, the prices are so low that people just, instead of selling, throw it away. You would have seen visuals like that. So I was asking him that where does he sell his produce, and he said, I don't sell it to the at the mandi, because the paperwork takes very long. It takes 2.5 months for us to get the money. Even if it's for a little less money, we sell it outside. I said, okay, that's interesting. Then I said, so what is it that you think you would need? So he said, it'll be lovely if we have cold storages, because that way I can keep my produce and sell it when I get a better price. I don't have to dispose it off, because I don't have cold storages. Whoever has it have control over it. So so this is his version of a cold storage. In his naivety. So basically because in terms of technique, because they make masks, they only deal with half of it. So initially when they made these, there are these lines. So they cut it into half and then they sculpted this out. They made these little vessels or storage boxes of sorts, which indicates reality. In a very naive way, it's him that he's represented as the guardian of the boxes. But with more work, so when we came to here, they could scoop out the whole thing, and they had these little shallow carvings on top. But this is where I'm also talking about dexterity. Look at the filigree-like work that eventually they could achieve. And this was quite interesting. This is again a storage, but it has the whole process of farming, from sowing till the produce. And just had that, no food, no farmer, no food, no future kind of woven in. And so this entire series was in conversation with Tulu that we developed. They make a lot of, Rolling Stones reference to the turnouts also from the image of Kali. A lot of you may not know Rolling Stone also. Yeah, okay. So I thought there is interesting dichotomy, right? At one end, the rural consumption in India is going up, but in the hunger index also, our position is going down, in the sense that there are more hungry people in rural India. Yeah, so quite a dichotomy. While the consumption is going up, so I thought the turnout could be an interesting sort of an allegory for that. And then we did this whole series, which is called, again came up from a conversation which was called Andhbhakt at the end. Why? Because when I was there, the BJP spokesperson of the state was also there, and once he left, Tulu was like, everyone's running after this party, that party, but nobody knows what they're offering, but everybody's just following. So that frustration is what I wanted to channelize, and this is what we came up with. how you have affiliations, but you don't have eyes. This is how it was exhibited. I just thought I'll include some images there. If you go to my Instagram, what we've done is we've kind of added like another layer to these masks, you know. So these are Falguni ceramic lamps with me, again talking about food, food scarcity, food in the mind. Some other experiments where we basically taken old saris, made threads of them, and then we did these interesting type forms, and then we used that to create these lamps. And the types also half broken, so it's almost like some promises fulfilled, but it's still not complete. And representation of women in this space is so little that we also wanted to highlight that, so it was interesting. So this was the 2 series. As you can see, I don't know if you could understand, it basically says Amrit Kal. Same, the mayhem of political processes. So we created these interesting characters. We thought not everything needs to be serious, no? It could be. Any of you heard of dhokda? Yeah, they call dhokod. It's a craft from again from the Dinajpur area, where you know traditionally you would just bichhao it to sit on, and mostly made with jute. And so we're working with women there. Shanjita Di is one of them, who then have been trained to change the material from jute to cotton to make it more viable and palatable to a more urban audience. And it's quite interesting how the women have been so ingenious in picking up the technique of weaving, you know, so fast, and they're all done on backstrap loops. Yeah. And quickly taking, so, you know, while we're doing other products with them, they did this, Sanjay did these panels with me, where we looked at interesting words in the last 10 years used in politics, and we kind of defragmented those words. I don't know if you could get some of them. You must have heard of this, no? Na khayenge, na khane denge. So this is what it turned out to be, and they were quite beautiful. But it's quite interesting that they counted and made, so obviously they can't read because it's in English, you know. So there are some typographic gaps, mistakes, which, you know, they were very apologetic about, but we've kept them as markers of the maker. So they called a series called Chai Pe Charcha, because, yeah. Everybody knows Pappu. So they actually went in as banners. So this was a very interesting project with me and Achira. Achira is a was a student but is a friend now, and she works with the artisans in Burdwan quite a bit. You can also make out women do katha there, but different communities have different motives. So Hindu women do more figurative work, while Muslim women do more geometric kathas. And at that point, the NRC was a big thing, and there was a certain anxiety in the women folk of with whom she was working, because the men were talking and then they would come and talk at home, and then in certain sense the anxiety would just pass on. So we just wanted to, she wanted to express that. So we took some old kathas and we patched it together like a Scrabble. So like an old Scrabble with the green blocks. If you remember, anyone's played physical Scrabble?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So, yeah, and so the wordplay is in there. You could obviously create your own words, but we kind of created our own words, which then emotively showed anxiety. It also is quite interesting that visually it looks like farmland, no? Like plowed farmland in some sense. So all the words that they were hearing, we just kind of put it together. That's how it was displayed. And there's another small project. I don't know if you know or not, in the city of Calcutta, if you go to Notun Bazaar area, which is Cheetpur, like if you walk about 2.5 kilometers, there are 11 crafts being practiced within that stretch. And we always think craft is a phenomena which is rural, but it isn't. And there's hardly any focus on urban crafts in with us. And this is a community of artisans that we work with. They basically are the sweet mold makers. So they were also the same people. Their ancestors were also the ones who would make the first printing blocks. Yeah. So it's quite interesting how the roles overlapped. And so we made these interesting boxes. They were called Khatta Meetha. And while you had the sweet blocks, you also had some blocks which had some words which may not be very sweet to swallow. And you could choose your own word. And so these sweets were actually distributed during the exhibition. It's a conversation. The display of it. And this was an interesting work by Meenakshi. Meenakshi wanted to work, she's a practicing artist, and Meenakshi wanted to work with the same artisans and use the sweet block to convey a message which again may or may not be. I think you've all heard of Tejo Mahalaya. Have you? Yes? Can somebody tell me what Tejo Mahalaya is?
The Shiv temple which was supposed to be.
Yes, so it's a speculative theory which says that.
The myth and the controversy.
Yes. Yes. So. And then she carved one block which basically with herself which said Amanush. So sweet blocks, whatever you write, it's always in reverse, so it turns around. So this is how we displayed it. And these were some of my experiments with the guys who make bus graphics. So these are actually full-size terracotta dolls. Terracotta vases made in Bengal by a friend of ours called Ashish Da, and so I juxtaposed them together. That was about all the female-oriented schemes that the governments have launched. So anyway, I'll not get into the... So another small project I wanted to share with you guys, maybe I'll stop here today, is this series. When I was in Jaipur, I would go around, take photographs, and just before the Dashera, they would basically make these huge effigies of Ravan, and it really fascinated me, the color, the scale. But I loved it when only the armature was showing. It was so architectural that I loved it. And I remember taking these pictures way back in 2010. And look, it almost looks like Paul Klee's drawings. I found like a little 10 on the wall. So anyway, so a friend of mine kept saying that, it's a good start, Swarup, it's a good start. You should take this forward. But I didn't know what to do with it. So the photographs just remained with me. And of course, much later, I actually worked with bamboo artisans who are in Dompada in Calcutta. Yeah, and I've done a lot of typographic, sort of decorative installations using bamboo. And of course, like when we were doing that, even the logo of the event is inspired by the bamboo armature. But what happened was, I started working with Vinod, who's this eccentric guy, who I was making some interesting installation. And I would just give him some references, so he will make it, wear it himself, and send me photos. So I have many of his photos when he's wearing his own creations, So all of them, as you can see, is him. And this is what he created for me, this entire installation of armature. And then once the installation was over, I had the pieces, and it was quite interesting for me to see what is it that I can do with them. And then, we get into this exercise where I got some models to come and model them for me. And interestingly, they were boys. And this is what came out of it, this entire series, which was sartorial, but so what was interesting was that, why do I consider it a collaboration, is because I left the creations onto him with some references, but invariably he'll sort of take it forward, do his own spin, and then he sent it to me, not knowing what I was doing with it. So I took it to the studio, and I had a lot of fun. So the heels were, an interesting point of conversation. What was more fun was that we took the visuals back to their quarters, and we did an exhibition there. And we let them react to the visuals. So it was a nice back and forth. He created something for me, and I created something for him. And then, we were putting it out then for a larger commentary. And we really had fun. And, the conversations we had around the exhibition were fantastic. This was actually in the second floor of a building, and it was there for almost 5.5, 6 years. So every time nobody pulled it out, and it was there for a while. And of course, I've also worked with them, Gopal and his team, in creating more sort of decorative pieces for installations. So it's interesting how a technique can have, one. So my love for masks have also, because you go to, various places, communities, you have conversations, you also bring back some souvenirs from them, and these souvenirs have then kind of started finding space in my work. So they initially just started because you always want to know the character behind the mask, They were not supposed to be hung on the wall, there had to be some other purpose. So I thought in the void of me not knowing the purpose, I was just creating my own. And so it is developed into, this is chow mask before it's painted. I love how the performers who would work with me also would come and react to the character that they were seeing. I remember when I was very young, I was shooting these chow artists, and so the guy who was playing Durga, because she's this, fighter, and Kartike, so when they would take the mask out also, they will stand like this, and if they were playing Saraswati, like they'll take the mask out and then they'll just stand like that. It was amazing how there was a juxtaposition of the character. So it's interesting, I always was interested in what does the persona of the mask, does it reflect onto the person. And so we created our own myths and our own performances around the masks. In that sense, making it our own. And then those performances led me to create other things. So it's quite interesting how these conversations then sort of overlap, and there are cross currents which cross-pollinates. So I'll end with this small project that I've done in the north of the city. And why I wanted to talk about this and collaboration was also because we were restoring an old house, and I knew nothing of how to restore an old house. So we got these great masons from Murshidabad, because that's unfortunately the only place at the moment in Bengal where they still practice old masonry, and then we got them to come and work with us. And boy, I learned so much from them, and this project was also my friend Iftikhar, who runs Calcutta Walks, and because he takes people to different parts of the city, old city, that he wanted to talk about different quarters there, or padas. And interestingly, a lot of the padas were based on the craft that they were practicing. Like there is Dorji Pada, there is Potua Pada, there is Boi Pada, so it's quite interesting how, again, we are referring to makers. And so I'll quickly take you through the journey. It was old house, this is how it was, we got part of it, and this is what we did. We got one part of it, and we restored that part. And the idea was to blend in, so the color is also a reference to the colors next door. And this is how it looks inside after restoration. And that is what goes on to making the wall. They're all load-bearing walls, which basically means that they don't have columns. And so, so this is what we created. A lot of old grills patched together. Boipada. So this is quite interesting. A reference to typography. We went to BBD Bagh area, and there were a lot of, and we were really short on budget. And so what was interesting was that there are these typographers who make these plaques, and a lot of people commission plaques, but they never come back to take it. Yeah, and they would have paid some token advance. So they had all these plaques, and no use because obviously they have specific names. So we said, give it to us, and so we patched them and cut them so that they become a little abstract and used and made a floor out of them. So interesting, old detailings. But what was interesting was Dorchipada, so reference to Charkha. This was Jatrapada. And you know, if you go to Notun Bazaar, you still have the shop which sells these transcripts of old Jatras with these lovely covers. And so we thought it should be celebrated. So they're still making it now. Only thing is, instead of hand doing it, they do it on the computer. But it's fantastic that they still do it. You know, it's not obsolete. So this was called the Notun Bazaar, and we of course have the reference to our fish and the tholes. So a lot of research went into it. In fact, the visual that you see at the back is from a 1910 catalog from Calcutta, which were making bespoke clothing for men. And so we pulled out certain images from there and used them. Maybe I'll quickly just go through it. A little gory detail. You know, we bought these drawers. So they were like these column of drawers, and it was in a big iron safe. So we said, we don't need the safe, if you could just give us the drawers. We took it, and then when we opened the drawers, you know, they had like book catalogs, like you know, like catalog titles like that. And we pulled out one, and it said, so-and-so convicted, so-and-so eliminated, so-and-so. So, death record. So all crazy thing, yeah, inside all the drawers have that. By alphabetic. It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I don't tell this to many, but yeah, if you ever go there, you pull out a drawer, you may find some cards still. Yeah, so I'll only say that, you know, my experience of working with artisans in the collaborative process, it's not all hunky-dory. You know, there are disappointments, you know, there are breach of trust, but you have to take it in the stride of taking the conversation forward, and not everything will go your way. So be open to the possibility of disagreements.
Are they really bothered about their name coming on something or something?
So it's quite interesting. I'll tell you an interesting story. I don't know if I should, but we have already. So it's quite interesting that series on gender. Yeah, I had commissioned that series in that sense that, you know, because it needed work. So like after, and so it was done, and I told him once you know the curfew is off, you send it to me, you know, you courier it to me, and he said okay, and then about a month or so, my friend Srila from Bombay, very excited, sends me, you know, I've got this guy who's done this fabulous work, and you know, he's going to be the star of the show. I said, oh great, what does it mean? He said, gender commentary. And I'm like, oh, how interesting. And I said, send me the work. Can I have a look? He's like, yeah. So he tells the office, and I get, and they're exactly the same plates. And so I was like, wow. So then I get on a call, the conversation. Yeah, it depends. It depends, it depends, the same, like, which applies to us. I mean, are you sustenance driven? Are you, what's your motivation? So a lot of them, with the access of internet and social media, have aspirations which are fantastic to have. They're selling. They don't need anyone. They can market themselves, and it's fantastic. But sometimes the spirit of collaboration is, eventually it's about who holds power, and who has access. And so it's a stereotype to say that the urban designer may be the only one who holds power. It may not be true all the time. So it's quite interesting how that table's turning too, and that's why I say that, so it's interesting to have frameworks worked out which safeguards each other's interest. There are breach of trust, but what also, the joy of co-creating is fantastic. I really love that process, and so even after having that, conversation, we're still in conversation. We're working together. He's just doing a series with me on nakshatras, which are constellations. It's quite interesting. VNA has these plates which are about Indian nakshatras, and they were Kalighat pot style. And I've just told him to recreate a couple for me. So the conversation's on. We've come to a term where we understand each other's motivations. So if it's exhibited online, he asks me, where is it going? Even if it's commissioned, then I share that information with him. So yes, they are.
What we found is that when you went to Santa Fe, and you take one person you're allowed to take to the place, you have to choose very carefully, because most of the time they're not exposed to or educated or whatever. And we found whether it's the Crafts Council or all these Indian Crafts Councils or anybody else, it's just those award winners or those few people recognized are coming back
Again and again.
Again and again, like you also talking about a certain name again and again. So I don't know how much does it percolate to the entire community. That's my thought process, my issue is that whenever we pick up one person and we're continuously promoting that person, how much does it really percolate to that entire community who's actually, maybe he's now become a Mahajan, and the rest of them are working.
Sure.
So that's sometimes the thought process, the dichotomy that goes on in mind, that who really do you choose, and how important is it for it to percolate?
So I would look at it from the prism of equity, and I feel that for that we've had that advantage for the longest time. Even if there are one or two people from the community, we'll come into this whole question of, let's say, how reservation is in this country and who gets the reservation, if I may say so, from politically incorrect about it, that it is someone who's still at the forefront, of the system that gets benefits of it. Should it percolate down? Yes, it should. But at least there is a sense of equity that's setting in. So even if it's a couple, and it's quite interesting that in terms of Potachitro, I'm forgetting his name, the gentleman who's very famous Potachitra artist whose work's there in the airport. You come in, that big Potachitra. Sorry, I'm bad with names. Yeah. So because of him, there is aspiration within others to strive and reach the gallery space. So Uttam's one of them, and it's okay. There may be some methods which are not okay at times, but if we rectify and come back, it's fine. But what happens is you need to set. you know, we all need inspiration, no? So within the community, if someone's achieved it, the others also strive to achieve it. And I think that is important. You know? So there would be 5 others who would come and say, why don't you take me? My work is equally good, you know. I want to be in that position. So it's fantastic to have that. So it's okay to have 1 or 2 go, but eventually, you know, you would see. And I was in Mayurbhanj with some artists who are making dokra. They have a page of their own, and they're getting orders from the page. They don't need a designer. They don't need anybody. They can market themselves, getting orders. I went to a cluster where they make sabai grass. The work is coming from Gujarat for exports in cartons to making these huge lamps. You know, beautiful. Goes back. So, you know, these connections are happening and these disruptions are happening, and I'm glad that they're happening. You know, amidst all this, as you know, so many design students here, you would have to find your own ground. Yeah, and not piggyback on some artisan's back. Yeah, it'd be interesting. You need to have a voice. You need to have that conversation and be brave to put yourself out there. So what has happened? I just feel that, you know, you would always see artisans and their hands. Yeah, why not zoom out, show the face? Why only hands always? Right? There's a person behind. So what happens is, I also understand the insecurities that we go through as design fraternity. You know, so you know, you've cultivated something, you don't want to give it up. You know, it's a resource because it also generates revenue for you. So you know, we stutter to zoom out and show the faces in a lot of cases. So it's interesting how that equation also works.
And now I know the backstories that are working, which is a very good thing. Thank you. Any questions? Firstly, a big round of applause.
Yeah, anyone have anything that...
Any observation, any comment, any question?
So I was wondering, like, you have such a refined taste and an urban upbringing. When you actually are working with the artisans, how do you
Just pass it
communicate? Like, how do you strike the chord? Like, you know, they are artisans. They don't have that formal training or the way you perceive art in your mind. Like you're working with the Gombira masks, the artisans from Dinajpur, or maybe all the other forms. Like, how do you communicate your thought, your perception to the artisans? Because both of you are coming from 2 different levels of thinking.
For me, I find it easy to communicate with them than to a stifled intellectual sometimes. It's just so much easier to just communicate with them. Sit, have conversation, talk about life, you know, and a lot of it is lived experiences that we're trying to see if they could be converted into sort of a creative visual.
So basically you're trying to say that you let all the talking or all the planning or the creativity happens through communication, or you
Yes.
always get something on your mind when you go there?
You know, I'd be wrong if I say that I don't go with a certain idea, but in most cases, it changes. Because once you are on the ground and you're having communication, some better ideas come. Like with the Dinajpur project, we were just creating certain objects, and it had no bearing on what eventually came out. But that just became a personal project between him and me. Because a lot of he was perhaps the first farmer I spoke to, you know, if I may say so, who was on the ground, and I wanted to know what the ground reality in my state is of what is happening with MSP. You know, are they Are they benefiting? Do they sell it at all? Is it required? And that's how that entire body of work came about. As designers, of course, you also are sensitive to material. You know, if it's gum art, it takes longer to dry. You know, so yeah, those sensitivities of how much can you chisel are, of course, there. You know, but the larger conversations are, and that's why I get very thrilled when an interesting things come up, because you didn't think of it, you know, but something, the conversation sparked something, so which is quite fantastic.
Yeah, may I just continue that
Yes,
question a bit? I have a voice that doesn't need. Yeah. So I would like to. I'm also from NIFT. I would. So I would like to frame it like this. They are the hands and the designers are the brain. So the brain guides the hand to write the words, but the brain knows the story. So maybe like, so that's how like you can frame it.
It's quite interesting that we do have certain markers where it qualifies to be a collaborative work, or where you kind of conceptualized it and someone's creating it for you. Yeah. So where I feel that it's really something that have come from the other person, and it's developed through the conversation, is when we deem it collaborative.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like,
So there's a lot of work where it is not, where it's my idea and someone's making it. Like, yeah.
That's what, like the hand knows how to write. So, and you know the story, what you want to move. So it just
the
gets
question
so
is that, no, so the story is not mine, it's a shared story.
Yeah. And then you blend it together.
So a lot of time, the stories arrive after we've had the conversation.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
People, who are working within the framework of someone who takes care of production, someone who looks at materials, somebody who's in the design team, and eventually you have a voice, but there are many people who are shaping that voice, right? Technically, aesthetically. But for me, I just feel that it's the next step where you go with an open mind, and it's the conversation which then gives you a certain space to co-create together, and which again need not be what. Yeah, so you really don't go with a certain idea in mind, but it's just a spark which then, leads to something else.
It initiates something like initiates and then organically just gets developed over there.
Yeah, sure. In the sense that this body of work, the let's say the mask series, we were doing one project. This is an offshoot, and of course it's commissioned work in that sense of the word, because he's not looking at creating those pieces. But the impetus, of course, comes from me, where I push him to have this conversation. But having said that, the outcome is something that is sort of perceived together. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, actually, I'd just like to add a bit to your Calcutta Bungalow, one of my very favorite places. One thing you had mentioned during your presentation was it is structure without columns, but that is not the thing. I'll go back to the point that we had earlier discussed also, that was also the restriction.
Yes, of course.
Yes, because old buildings are load-bearing structures.
Absolutely.
And they cannot be broken apart in any point, and the materials and the load that it can take when you put in new furniture on all is the hindrance. And I think one very major part of collaborator in that was the owner, because the owner was the first person whose property it belonged to. And very recently, when I visited the same place, I was very impressed by a change that has happened. When it had initially happened, the neighborhood was a very ordinary neighborhood. But somewhere, because of Calcutta Bungalow,
the adjoining building faces have taken a change. They are they are going for renovations. Maybe more collaborations are actually possibly happening. We don't know. Even Iftikhar has agreed to the same thing. I just mentioned it to him. So I feel that it does happen.
Actually, it was a very sort of emotional project in that sense of the word, because we've always seen these buildings crumble. So you've seen more palatial buildings sort of resurrected, but like smaller townhouses, we've always seen it crumble. It just is easy for everyone to break it down. At least that's the reality of this city at the moment, unfortunately. I'm restoring my own ancestral house, without getting into too much details, it just is more profitable for everyone if the old goes. Because whoever owns the land gets a better deal, because you don't get a discount to say you want to restore it and keep the legacies alive. Well, everybody talks about legacies. There is no financial discount if whoever's building it is making money, whoever's supplying material is making money, and then there are little offshoots which I rather not detail out. But so it's just easy and beneficial for everyone to if the old goes. So many people, we know who came to that. We thought that it'll only be, it's only the expats or the foreign traveler who would enjoy that space. So if they would get in a lot of people to take feedback. But we had such amazing people coming in where a family came in and checked out for 3 days. They had an ancestral house, which is no more. All the oldies just wanted to relive their old memories in a house which was like theirs. And so I can't tell you how many such people that we found, who just wanted to relive those memories.
Yeah, that's what I say, that in this, I think about 8 years or so,
Right.
this has happened. So in this 8 years, that neighborhood has brought
Yes,
back-
slowly, we see the change. It's excruciatingly slow, but it's there.
It's there.
It's there.
It's not breaking it down apart anymore.
Thank God for it.
That was the most interesting.